Let's talk free school meals now. Do you have children? If you do, you might think, well, yeah, quite frankly, taxpayers, yes, you should be paying to help me feed my kids. If you don't have children, you might be a little bit less sympathetic to that view. I found this interesting because in London, Sadiq Khan is very proud of this initiative. All state primary school kids will now get free school meals. There's been calls to have this rolled out nationwide, Joe. What do you make to that?
Well, all children in England, reception year 1 and 2, get free school meals anyway. Then it varies depending on where you live. It's slightly different in Scotland and different in Wales as well. The problem, I think, is that, you know, I care, as you know, we've discussed it before, I care very much about health and nutrition and good food. And I think if there are kids who are going to school without a proper breakfast, with, you know, crisp sandwiches and bars of chocolate and inappropriate stuff or nothing, then that has an impact on their learning, it has an impact on their fellow pupils. And in the long term, investment in children to have one decent meal a day would be quite a good thing. The problem is that when you get into the means testing for free school meals after year 3, the figure, the threshold is so low. It's £7,000 a year. So, you know...
Or being on universal credit.
Well, at a certain point, but you've still got to be within this low thing. So, you know, first of all, there's the concern that if you then take on a couple of hours' work, are you going to tip yourself over but not earn enough to pay for school dinners? The sensible thing to do would be, and I suspect that, you know, in a cost of living crisis, people will not have the appetite for free school meals for every child at primary school, but I do think it would be an investment in public health. But you could raise that threshold to something a bit more realistic, like £20,000. I mean, the reality is that there are people going to food banks, there are people living in temporary accommodation, there are people who have got, you know, a microwave and a kettle. You can't feed children properly on that. So you end up with takeaways or, you know, stuff that you've bought from the supermarket on the way. And I just think, you know, children need nutrition. If you give it to them at school, you know what they're going to get and what they're going to eat.
And Habib?
Well, I think Joe makes some good points, but you have to take responsibility for your own children. If you bring children into this world, you've got to make sure that you've got the wherewithal to look after them. And the notion that every child should be fed at the state while they're at school, I don't think is a sound one. Parents have got to take responsibility for their children. The state already spends a huge amount of money on educating these children. We already have the state nannying through nannying through parents, not the children, nannying the parents, taking away parental responsibility in a whole host of ways. You know, increasingly taking younger children away from their parents, encouraging parents to put them into child daycare centres at the age of 9 months, in Jeremy Hunt's last budget. So I think maybe the threshold should be increased. I was of the understanding that anyone on universal credit gets a contribution towards their children's school fees. But free children's meals, I'd have to check that. But the £7,000 per annum, if that is the limit, I agree is too low.
It's ridiculous.
It is too low. But a universal, everyone gets a free meal, I just don't think is the right direction of travel, and it's for giving parents the responsibility they have to their own children. It's a bit like the notion that was brought in, suggested a couple of months ago, that anyone who has more than 2 children, at the moment universal credit basically stops at 2 children, that cap should be removed, and no matter how many children you have, your benefits should go up. And that is just daft as brushes.
But just to go back to your point, Ben, about, you know, parents taking responsibility, which, you know, of course, most parents will try and take responsibility, but people's circumstances change. They get evicted. They find themselves, you know, homeless. They find themselves out of work. They find their, you know, suddenly their partner leaves them or they become bereaved.
But that's a threshold issue then, isn't it,
Yes, exactly.
Joe? Yeah.
But, you know, I think we have to get away from this idea of the sort of the deserving and the non-deserving poor. We should be in a position to support children whose parents are unable to do it for a variety of reasons. But, you know, the idea that somebody cannot feed their child and the child is going to school hungry is appalling. It's absolutely shocking. And we know...
It is, but we're not talking about that. That's not the suggested policy.
But if someone is so poor that they honestly, truly can't feed their own child, then that person would already be getting free school meals for that child, so that child would be taken care of.
Yes.
What we're talking about now is a parent that earns, I don't know, whatever, 70 grand a year, now getting free school meals for their kids.
But that was always the argument about family allowance, you know, that it was the wine fund for the middle-class mummies who'd meet up for the yummy mummies who'd use it. While
Really?
other people would... Well, I mean, you know, whether or not that's still the case. But, you know, the idea of giving it to the mother in the old days was so that the mother had actually got some money that she could use for the children in case Dad was spending it in the pub or at the betting shop. Now, you know, one would like to think that those days have changed to a certain extent. But I just think, you know, of course, the problem is always with means testing. If you do means testing, you end up with a mean benefit. But £7,000 a year as a threshold is utterly ridiculous.
Too low.
And it needs to be looked at. And that would seem to me to be the sensible way round it, that you don't necessarily say everybody gets it, but you bring the threshold up to something that would also help people who are, you know, the poor but working poor.
And, of course, the other thing they should do is cut taxes so people have more money in their own pockets to decide how they spend it on their children.
You're going to mention Liz Truss in it.
I was on the verge of mentioning Liz Truss.
We're coming on to Liz Truss, but
all roads lead back to it.